You make a really interesting argument in your book, I think, about polarization. And the argument you make about polarization is, first of all, that polarization is affective and not ideological. I'm going to ask you to make that distinction. But also that polarization is endogenous to this sort of personal party system. In other words, it's not like we have for our listeners, it's not like we have polarization, which then leads to personal parties, but rather the development of personal parties helps to increase this particular type of polarization. Could you kind of flesh that out for everybody?
Yeah. So first,
there's a lot going on.
The ideological polarization is when sort of people divide in society into two or more sort of groupings that are internally ideologically aligned. Mm-hmm. So in the U.S. context, Southern Democrats would have been not necessarily fully ideologically aligned with Northern Democrats through much of the 20th century, even though they were in the same party. And so the partisan ideological polarization under that scenario is not as high as when all of the people in the Democratic Party are sort of all have the same ideological beliefs, say, about the racial order in the United States, the way that Democrats didn't in much of the 20th century, where Northern and Southerners.
Yeah, sort of ideological sorting.
Right. Now that would be ideological partisanship. Mm-hmm. Affective partisanship is where the individuals are sorting into parties based on sort of the identity of their own party and the identity of the other party. And the distinctions that people are making are not so much policy related. Oh, I don't like the Democrats or I don't like the Republicans because of the policy they stand for, whether it's economic policy, taxation, foreign policy. It's not so much the policy stance of the other party that they're opposed to, but the actually very people in the other party. So I don't like Democrats because of who they are. I don't like Republicans because of who they are. And I make a bunch of assumptions about what kind of people they are, and I know I don't like those other kind of people. And it happens on both sides. So that's affective polarization. Now, how is that sort of endogenous to this process? So the thing that I've noticed about American politics is that we're in a situation where if you asked Americans today sort of what they disagree on a lot about, do they disagree on whether or not, we should support Ukraine with more military aid, or do they disagree on whether or not we should tax more and spend less? There's going to be a fair bit of alignment actually across parties on those ideological positions, sort of those programmatic positions about policy. But there's going to be less alignment across or agreement across parties and almost perfect alignment within parties on basic issues about how to interpret the very moves that Trump made to undermine democracy. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps the most poignant example of this or glaring example of this would be election denialism. Mm-hmm. Right? And so there's a lot of uniformity within the Democratic Party that they believe that Biden fairly won this election. And there's a lot of uniformity within the Republican Party that Trump was the legitimate winner and that the election was stolen, mm-hmm. right? And so the polarization isn't about some ideological position about policy, but rather the very fundamentals about what happened in November of 2020, right. and indeed this includes the January 6th as well. Polarization over how to interpret that very event. Mm-hmm. So it's not that people deny that Joe Biden occupies the Oval Office today, or people are polarized over over that very fact. What they're polarized over is whether or not the Democrats undermined democracy to steal the election in November, and whether or not the Republicans and Trump tried to steal the election, if you will, by overturning or interfering with the electoral count process.
Yeah. So in this affective polarization, which I've heard referred to as tribalism.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And also as epistemological polarization, where people are seeing like entirely different worlds, just kind of mm-hmm. what you're describing around. But the conflicts between different tribes or different teams becomes almost existential. Like, mm-hmm. I can't let you win because it's not like we just disagree on some policy, but rather it's sort of the end of democracy as we know it, or whatever mm-hmm. we want to call called this system. And election denialism seems to be really key, doesn't it? You think about how insistent Donald Trump has been on denying the legitimacy of the 2020 election, and the extent to which he has made it kind of a litmus test of support throughout the Republican Party. I mean, what do you make of all of that?
Yeah, so this is not something that we walk through in our book, but the world of dictators actually gives us a very clear answer on this. Is that Donald Trump doesn't have to truly believe that the election was stolen for him, nor do any of the people that say and repeat that sentiment, nor do they have to believe that to be true privately. What matters here is that Trump says, to sort of endogenously induce loyalty among the elite supporters in his party. He can throw out an outlandish statement that, in fact, the more outlandish and the less likely it is to be true, the better. And the reason why is that he can figure out sort of who is willing to sort of debase themselves by repeating the lie that everybody knows is not true. He can sort out who is sort of a true loyalist and who's not. And what's even more sort of pernicious about this process is that the more that elites sort of repeat the lie, not only does he use it as a selection mechanism to figure out who's sort of going to be the most loyal amongst these potential elites, and so you see this as how he's sorting out sort of who earns his nomination is basically based on the extent to which they're willing to do the next election denialism. When people start to repeat that, it actually makes it less likely that people outside of the MAGA circle are going to take them seriously. And so it may actually close off opportunities, whether it be in the private sector or in future political career outside of MAGA, may close off those opportunities.
Oh, so you're like stuck.
So you're stuck, right? So neither Trump may not believe it and nor the elites believe it, but they've repeated it. That now the only way for these people to have power, and in a dictatorship where it reaches its peak, is that people actually don't have economic opportunities outside the party, and so the more that they've repeated this, it reduces those other opportunities, and so they have no choice in the end but to remain loyal because that's their best sort of economic outcome, their power outcome, or whatever it is that they care about.
Outcome.
That is with that party, right?
Yep.
And because by repeating the falsehoods, they have actually demonstrated that it reduces their option, what we call the outside option, their ability to have amass power, amass wealth, or have a job and a well-paying job and prestige.
I'm thinking of the sort of efforts that Trump and many of the Republicans are making to redefine the January 6th people as hostages, patriots, peaceful protesters, all kinds of, and I mean that in itself seems to me like a kind of way of redefining what political violence is. This kind is maybe acceptable.
There's a strong finding that we have from dictatorships that when dictatorial governments control lots of information, state-owned media, these kinds of things, state-owned newspapers. They're very good at selective attribution. And then what does that mean? So it's if there's bad economic news, they don't deny that the economy isn't doing so well, but rather they attribute that to someone, not them, external forces that are causing the economy to go down badly. However, when the economy is doing well, then yes, it was all my doing. Right. I did this. Right? So selective attribution. And that's a way of sort of saying, okay, we're not going to deny the world as is out there. We're going to help you interpret what that means. And I think that's what goes on with this. We're not going to say that January 6th didn't happen, right? We're not going to deny that that actually happened because we can see the pictures, right? We can see people assaulting police officers. So they don't deny that happened, but they then reinterpret what that means, right? And it could be that it was just a few bad apples. They were plants by the other side that actually committed the violence. The rest of them were innocent, but they're being caught up in some sort of political witch hunt, right? So it's how you interpret that evidence. But they aren't denying that, saying, you know what, that photo or the TV, the TV footage that I watched live as it was happening on January 6th, like that didn't actually happen. Like they're not doing that kind of denial, but they are reinterpreting the evidence and elites then mimic that, and that becomes the narrative by which other people interpret what that historical event.
Right.